It's midnight GMT. Hello and namaste. I'm Davina Gupta and this is Business Matters on the BBC World Service. Today we are live with our guests in Mexico and Singapore. And we're talking about flash floods in parts of the UAE. In Dubai, flights are cancelled and malls are flooded. We speak to a tourist stranded in a popular mall of Dubai.
It's like an event that no one could control. The amount of rainfall that Dubai has seen in the last days has been higher than it's ever seen.
Is the global economy out of the woods? The IMF says yes. But we find out which economies are likely to get back on track and for how long. That's Business Matters here on the BBC. But first, the latest news. Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. A BBC investigation has found that Russia lost nearly a quarter more troops in the second year of its invasion of Ukraine compared with the first 12 months. Olga Ishina is from BBC News Russian, which took part in the investigation.
For 2 years we have been watching the expansion of military graveyards in more than 70 locations across Russia. By cross-checking thousands of names on headstones against local and social media reports, we have identified more than 50,000 Russian fighters killed in Ukraine. This figure is 8 times higher than Moscow has acknowledged. This reflects a shift in tactics. Prisoners have been recruited with the promise of freedom after 6 months of service. We tracked more than 1,000 inmates from the day they signed up to the day they died. More than half died within 12 weeks of arriving on the front line.
The United Nations Human Rights Office has called for all involved parties to address an increasingly humanitarian crisis in Gaza and to help stem rising violence in the occupied West Bank. The UN's Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, said Israel continued to impose unlawful restrictions on the distribution of aid to Gaza, something the Israeli government denies. Andrea Di Domenico, the head of the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in the Palestinian territories, echoed his comments.
In terms of the impact on the famine, the problem is not just about food. The problem is that malnutrition and famine is a much more complex. And because of the quasi-total destruction of all civil infrastructure, health, water-related, sanitation-related, it's much bigger than simply, bringing in flour and bake a few loaves of bread or pita.
Polls have opened in the Solomon Islands in an election in which China's growing regional influence is a major issue. The Prime Minister of the small Pacific nation says he'll deepen ties with Beijing if he's re-elected. His main challengers want to reduce China's presence on the islands. Zambia has made an appeal to the international community for $900 million to deal with its worst drought on record. Half of the country's population has been affected. Here's Kutsia Sala.
In a televised speech, President Hakainde Hichilema made a formal appeal for emergency assistance, in his words, with a heavy heart. He said the funds would help provide humanitarian aid and food assistance for half of the country's population. The dry period has affected much of the central and southern regions since mid-January, destroying 2/3 of the country's corn crops. Mr. Hichilema had previously declared a national disaster at the end of February. The crisis poses a threat to national food security as well as water and energy supply.
Kutsia Sala reporting, BBC News. British members of Parliament have overwhelmingly backed plans to ban anyone born after 2009 from ever buying cigarettes. The proposals are amongst the strictest anti-smoking measures in the world. They also include restrictions designed to make vapes less appealing to children. The bill was championed by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, but his critics argued the law would limit personal freedom. The judge hearing Donald Trump's fraud trial in New York has said he's hopeful opening arguments can begin next Monday. It had been thought the process of selecting 12 jurors could take weeks. Our North America correspondent is John Sudworth.
The court has made quicker progress than many legal experts had anticipated, as the potential jurors are questioned and then either selected or, in most cases, rejected. Many have openly admitted that given their preconceptions of the man seated in the courtroom in front of them, they are unable to be fully impartial. 7 have so far been chosen. The final 12, along with 6 alternate members in case of illness, will face the weighty task of deciding a case fraught with consequences, not only for Donald Trump, but for America.
John Sudworth reporting. Kenya's police chief is being sued over comments he made about striking medics. As a walkout by staff reaches its 5th week, 9 civil society groups accuse Japhet Koome of denying healthcare workers the right to protest. On Sunday, Mr. Koome ordered police to take action against the demonstrators, who he said were becoming a public nuisance. He refused to apologise. Kenyan healthcare workers, calling for better paying conditions, continued to protest on the streets on Tuesday, despite a heavy police presence. In football, Paris Saint-Germain have beaten Barcelona and Borussia Dortmund have overcome Atletico Madrid in 2 high-scoring quarter-final matches in the European Champions League. The French and German teams will now face each other in a 2-leg semi-final. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to Business Matters. Namaste, I'm Davina Gupta, and wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us at this hour. We welcome also from our team in the gallery, Lexi, Kumar, Alex and Chris. So thank you again. On the program today, International Monetary Fund strikes a confident note for the global economy. We find out its impact on people and businesses.
We're seeing people that are going out to dinner and making prudent choices on what they're getting so that their check average is lower.
That's a restaurant owner in the US. We hear more from him. Also, UK's big plans to ban smoking for the young people. We take a look at where different countries stand on such policies and what's the link to the tax collection there. All that and more is coming up. It's also an election year, and perhaps the election year, because majority of the world's population is seeing nearly 49%, one would say, going for polls, and that's why we headed to the country where nearly 1 billion people will be voting. That's India. Later on the show, let's get our guest in, David Ko, financial analyst and the co-founder of the Smart Investor based in Singapore. How are you, David?
I'm very good, Davina. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you.
Yes, thank you so much. It's nearly early. Good morning for us. But what you waking up in Singapore? What's the big news there?
Well, at the moment, I guess it's going to be a nice sunny day today. We had a washout yesterday. We tend to talk about the weather quite a lot over here in Singapore. It's going to be a nice sunny day. I looked up at the moon last night, and I know it's an old wives' thing, but there were no rings around the moon, which means it's going to be a sunny day today.
A sunny day. Oh, wow. I mean, I like this weather prediction that you're doing based on these theories. But it's also, as I mentioned earlier, a year for global election. And in Singapore, there's been talks about an election by the year end.
Very well. We may very well have one. What is happening? Yeah, what we have at the moment is that the Prime Minister has announced that he will be handing over the reins to the next Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong, in May. So what we do have is succession planning here in Singapore. So there is no guesswork involved. We know who the next Prime Minister is going to be, and Lawrence Wong has been groomed for that job over the last year or so, and he's done pretty well up until now.
Well, guesswork is involved in Mexico, where Sarah Burke is joining us from the Economist Bureau Chief for Mexico, Central America and the Caribbean. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. What's the mood like when we talk about elections in Mexico?
Well, here it's a sort of done deal as well, or people think it is. The polls show that Claudia Sheinbaum is going to be the likely winner. But, you know, there's lots of interest in the elections, lots of reporting on it. That's what everyone's talking about, sort of day in, day out, and it will be until the election.
Of the country ravaged by floods. In fact, in Oman, at least 18 people have been reportedly killed because of it. And we can take you to Dubai now. Well, that's the sound of flash floods hitting stores in a mall in Dubai, where after heavy rain batters some Gulf states and flights to the airport had to be diverted there, and they've started from that time, but many people have been stranded. And we were talking about this earlier, David. Your son is in Dubai, isn't he?
Yes, he is. Yeah, he went over there for a conference. He had no expectations whatsoever that it was going to be like that. And as a result of the heavy downpour, I think they all had to scramble and try and sort of find ways in which they can have a virtual conference as well as an in-person. But they're not expecting many people to turn up at the conference physically, simply because it is so much rain. But I tell you what, Davina, that is just called monsoons over here in Singapore. We have to live with that all the time. And our cure for monsoons is to carry an umbrella around with us.
Yeah, but we're talking about a Gulf state, and that's where it is surprising, and that's why it's in the headlines. I mean, we won't be worried about Singapore seeing this kind of rains, because the city, let's be honest, is well planned for it. But in Dubai, what's happened is that it's been nearly a year's worth of rain in just several hours in a day, with cars swept away, planes gushing through heavy rainfall. I was looking at those pictures from the airport where planes seem to be floating, and on the streets where if people try and walk, the water is up to their stomach, and that's why a lot of people had to stay home. And I spoke, in fact, earlier to a tourist who was stranded in the Mall of Emirates, Mithali Nikore, who is an economist, and she's a tourist from India, and someone whom I know as well. And I spotted that on Twitter she was stranded there, and I reached out to her, and this is what she just told us a few minutes ago.
There are thousands of people stranded at the mall, and I can see people have, created makeshift beds around me. The shops are shut down, a lot of shops are shut down, but all of the workers from those shops are still at the mall, as are like thousands of shoppers. They're trying to keep people in sort of confined areas of the mall to keep it safer. And yeah, it's crazy.
So what actually happened?
So, I mean, see, it's obviously a natural disaster. It's like an event that no one could control. The amount of rainfall that Dubai has seen in the last day has been higher than it's ever seen. And some are saying that it's one of the highest that has been on record in the last 25 years. And of course, there was a warning for public sector officials to work from home, and for schools, there was a closure today. But there was no, warning for tourists to stay in. There was no warning for the general public to stay in completely. We were just told to keep on looking at the rain warning. And it was clearly announced that the metro would be running till 3 in the morning.
And within, say, a matter of 6 to 8 hours, the roads were flooded and they've been blocked. Is the rain still continuing?
So what we're hearing is that the rain stopped around 11:30 p.m. But, there are stretches of the main Sheikh Zayed road that are completely flooded. And I can see on my Google map that, it's totally red. And as a result, thousands of cars are kind of stuck on that street. And until that street is kind of, decongested, it's difficult for other services to resume. And the metro station was completely flooded as well.
What about food and water right now?
Yeah, so we're in the middle of the Mall of Emirates, right? And we have a whole Carrefour downstairs. And easily, we could all have access to as much food and water as we wanted. I mean, but they closed down the Carrefour, they closed down a lot of the food shops. And in fact, some of the cafe staff are being so nice to people. They're going around and giving people water. So we're just like literally surviving on the kindness of some of the cafe staff.
Are there children around as well? Are there families?
Absolutely. Yes, there are a lot of families with young kids, and there's nothing really special being done for the kids. Parents are just managing, and literally, as I mentioned, there's just one washroom that's operational at this point for the entire population that's stuck here.
Yeah, but for how long do you think you'll have to be there? Any indication of the water levels going down in the city?
So at this point we have no clue because none of the authorities are able to give us any answer.
You're talking to me from a phone. Now, are there charging points there? Are you able to connect with your family members back home just to tell them how you are?
Yeah, my mother is in touch with me constantly. You know, I had my flight back to India tomorrow, but that's been cancelled. I rebooked for another flight the day after. And, you know, luckily the Wi-Fi is working perfectly at the mall, so that's lucky. And so I've been able to communicate, but yeah, like, I mean, we've been able to, you know, again, relying on the kindness of, you know, some of the strangers here. We have a Samsung store and there's an Apple store, so one can actually go into the store and charge one's phone. And they're just like very, you know, kindly helping people out.
I'm sure, you know, you came here as a tourist and this is not the experience that you had paid for.
I mean, honestly, I think the word mall, I'm just going to get PTSD with the word mall in my life for some time. This was really one of the craziest experiences. I'm really hoping that by, you know, in another few hours we'll be able to get like a metro up and running again, or at least get a cab. So really hoping to be able to get out of here ASAP. But till then, you know, it just feels okay that there are a lot of other people and that, you know, it's not just us.
It's a very difficult situation for Mithali Nikor, who's an economist and a tourist from India, who's stuck right now at the Mall of Emirates, even as we speak. And David, it's so ironical because Dubai was also the destination for COP28, the United Nations climate meeting just last year. And the UAE is one of the top 10 oil-producing nations, and this is exactly what was being debated there, the dangers of climate change.
Well, Davina, I think what they need to work out now is whether this is a one-off or whether this is going to be a recurring thing. I mean, in the case of Singapore, monsoons are a recurring thing. We get it every year. And I remember coming to Singapore as a young boy about 50-odd years ago, and we lived in a house, and I could never understand why the house next to us had a canoe in the front garden. It was like a kayak. Until the monsoon season came, we ran down to the local provision store, and I was wading waist deep in water. And guess what? The guy in the next house came down in his kayak, and he was paddling all the way down to the provision store. And he asked me if I would like to jump in and get a lift. But of course, I mean, things. We expect monsoons here in Singapore,
yeah.
And ever since then we've progressed, and we've widened all the drains. We have things in place so that we don't have those events where things get flooded. So Dubai, all around the Middle East, they have to work out whether this is going to be a one-off incident or is this going to be something that's recurring year after year after year.
Sarah, good to have you back on the show now, but we were talking about how Dubai was also the spot for the United Nations big climate meeting, COP28, just last year, and they were able to cobble an agreement where countries agreed on the need to transition away from fossil fuels in energy systems. Now, is it time that now the Gulf region also recognize the urgency of transitioning away from fossil fuels and to greener policies as well as they look at the real-time climate change?
I mean, definitely. It's obviously a huge theme in the Middle East and in the Gulf in particular, because of their reliance on oil. But it's also a theme here in Mexico. I mean, Mexico has amazing potential for solar energy, wind energy, but the current government has sort of relied on the oil company and sort of as a nationalistic policy and has not really done much in terms of the green transition. And in fact, it's one of the main issues that's being discussed in the lead up to the elections, because the very likely winner, Claudia Sheinbaum, is a climate scientist, and so people are expecting or hoping, at least those in the area, that she might be a bit greener and sort of starts to transition.
But it all requires significant investments. Do you think countries, especially the emerging economies like Mexico, are there then?
I mean, I think so. It pays off in the long run. I mean, yes, it requires investment, but in the end of the day, you know, Pemex, the state oil company here, is sucking up public funds. So if you diverted some of those huge injections of millions of dollars that the government was giving to Pemex and instead built, wind farms, then it would pay off very quickly.
Well, the transition from the petro economy to green economy and then its impact on the global economy. Let's talk about that, because there's been a new report by the International Monetary Fund, a global outlook to say that, which has renewed confidence in the global economy. And they've also talked about the world's biggest American economy, which has predicted a much stronger growth for this year of 2.7%, more than double the rate of any other advanced economies in the G7 club. In fact, in the annual World Economic Outlook, Germany's economy would be the weakest in the G7 club, and it said Russia would grow faster than all other advanced economies. So it's sort of a mixed picture here. Here's the chief economist of the IMF, Pierre Olivier, who said things are picking up for many of the world's economies.
We're saying the global economy that is going to be growing at 3.2% in 2024, and we expect 3.2% in 2025. So that's a reasonable number. It's not the supercharged number we used to have from 2000 to 2019, 3.8. We'd like to get back there, but it's not bad. And the other good news is inflation is coming down. So we're seeing inflation coming down in 2024 and in 2025. So we're gradually coming back to inflation target and putting that inflation behind us.
Now, this is important because the global economy had seen a shake-up because of the pandemic. The supply chains had been disrupted. But the IMF has also said there are risks there because of the ongoing conflict which is happening in the Middle East and also in Ukraine. Now, they've also spoken about the United States, as I mentioned earlier. They have said they're confident it will be able to retain its growth. And earlier I asked Ayoko Yoshioka, Senior Portfolio Manager of Wealth Enhancement Group, to explain what's the reason behind this kind of prediction from the IMF.
You know, the economy continues to be very strong in the U.S. We really haven't had the slowdown that higher interest rates would have been expected to have had in the overall economic growth, especially with the labor market remaining relatively strong. We're not seeing, large layoffs, and so people continue to be employed. And so because they're continuing to be employed, they have spending money and disposable income at their fingertips that they're able to spend and keep the economy growing.
So it's one thing to see these predictions on paper, but what's happening on the ground really? Let's stay with the US and find out how are ordinary people trying to spend, save and make a living. Duane Greenlia runs a restaurant in Orange County, California, and spoke to us earlier.
What we're seeing certainly is higher check averages, and I think the people that are going out to dinner that are experiencing that are spending more as they're at the restaurant. What we're seeing as an issue is how many people are actually going out to dinner. When you have a limited amount of funds, you decide on where to spend those. And that question is, do you stay at home, prepare your own food, or do you go out to a nice dinner? And I think that's what we're seeing, is the people that are going out are enjoying their evenings and spending money, versus the people that are deciding, hey, I'm going to stay at home and prepare my own dinner because I don't have the luxury of going out.
So compare it to, say, from the last 2 years after the pandemic. Are people coming to your restaurant more, and are they spending on high-priced items or not?
They are not spending on high-priced items. Our top wines have all slowed down a tremendous amount. We're seeing people that are going out to dinner and making prudent choices on what they're getting so that their check average is lower on average, except for the people that enjoy going out and then they're spending money. But that's a very small percentage.
And how's that hit your operation costs?
I believe this is true for almost all restaurants. You have a pressure of increased labor and you have the pressure of increased costs. In food and beverage, the margin of profit is very small. When you have those two high ticket items all increasing, the only thing you do is increase prices.
Let's talk about wages then. For your staff, are you paying more or less compared to last 2 years?
Our rates have gone up drastically. Most of back of the house, which we consider our kitchen staff.
Why is it that it's going up?
In California, there's two issues here. Cost of living has increased dramatically, and so the pressure for employers to pay more money to make up that difference is tremendous. The other part of that is California on April 1st increased all fast food operations of 60 units or more up to $20 an hour. And so that has increased all of our wages. Even though we're not fast food, that pressure has been placed on all small operators, and the pressure for our back of the house has been amazing. And people are asking for 20 and up for positions. 2 years ago, we were paying $16 and $17 an hour.
Any drastic measures that you had to take then just to keep your business running?
I wouldn't consider them drastic measures, but we have taken steady increases in menu pricing, and I've tried to keep that as minimal as possible to keep our operational levels where they need to be, but it has had an impact for sure.
Is this an environment where you can plan business expansion?
It is not. I'm finding with interest rates at the level that they're at, it makes you contemplate, hey, let's hold off for another 6 months and see what the Fed's going to do with interest rates before I plan an expansion.
Can you hold off for next 6 months and just keep your business running? Or is that also getting tough?
We can. No, we can. The problem with that is that you want to expand. You want it, and there's plenty of money to get. There are banks that are really aggressive in offering loans. It's just the interest rates makes that prohibitive.
That's Joanne Greenlee, who runs a restaurant in Orange County in California. The message from the U.S. Central Bank this evening has been that, well, we are not out of the woods yet. Well, Sarah, let's step back and look at the global economy. Is the worst over?
Seems like it might be, at least for some places. I mean, especially the US, which is looking really quite impressive in terms of its growth. Here in Mexico, things are not quite so positive. I mean, often Mexico's growth depends largely on the US's growth. The two economies are so largely intertwined, and there is a sort of feeling of positivity here. But next year, if you look at what the IMF report says about growth, it's not good. It's saying 1.4%. So I don't think every country's out of the woods. It might look good for the US, but it definitely doesn't look so good for other places.
David, we also saw China's first quarter growth numbers, that is from January, February and March. The GDP numbers coming at 5.3%, which is much more than what analysts were expecting. How are things looking in your part of the world?
About China, and we do look at China quite a lot from over here simply because we are so dependent upon China. But many people are saying that this is a one-off as far as China is concerned. And what you really need for any economy is to have confidence. The consumers need confidence to go out and spend, because in many economies, the consumer spending accounts for about 60% of the economy. And if the consumers don't have confidence, then it's going to be very difficult. You're going to be heavily reliant on the government spending. And that's one point I want to make, Davina. It's interesting that you picked a restaurant to speak to over in America. And I'd like to sort of, if you forgive the pun, there are no free lunches, right? I mean, the reason why we are getting this kind of economic growth is simply because of the amount of fiscal spending, government spending. And if the government keeps on spending...
that's pumped the money in the market so that consumers spend, but that leads to, once again, the double-edged sword of inflation and interest rates. Well, we leave it there. Thank you so much, David and Sarah, for being on this half of Business Matters. Stay with us, because on the other side, we talk about the world's biggest elections and how they're organized.
We'll be back with Business Matters very shortly. In an hour, the climate question asks, can fertilizers go green?
I actually think that a lot of these modular green ammonia are some of the more exciting technologies that are coming out, because that can potentially address a lot of these challenges.
Then don't miss Outlook.
When Erin Anato was diagnosed with autism and ADHD, she and her husband struggled to deal with it. They were working as manga artists in Tokyo, and so decided to create a manga exploring what they were going through, and it transformed their relationship.
And at 3:30 GMT, continue the story of the Hollywood exiles.
I'm Una Chaplin, and I want to know why my grandfather, Charlie Chaplin, was forced out of the United States. This week, he faces a grilling from federal authorities.
You've all that to look forward to here on the BBC World Service.
You're listening to Business Matters from the BBC World Service with me, Devina Gupta. Coming up, our special coverage about the world's biggest elections. We head to India, where nearly 1 billion voters will be casting their votes this Friday. We take a look at the numbers, the cost, and what voters want. Also, an industry that is fast becoming a job creator in the US. But first, the news.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. A BBC investigation has found that Russia lost nearly a quarter more troops in the second year of its invasion of Ukraine compared with the first 12 months. The investigation verified the identities of more than 50,000 soldiers killed during the conflict. The United Nations Human Rights Office has called for all involved parties to address an increasingly acute human rights and humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The UN's Human Rights Chief Volker Turk said Israel continued to impose what it called unlawful restrictions on the distribution of aid to Gaza, something the Israeli government denies. The US has said it'll impose new sanctions targeting Iran's missile and drone program in response to Iran's unprecedented attack on Israel over the weekend. People in the Solomon Islands are voting in a general election. The Prime Minister Manasseh Salamare says he'll tighten relations with China if he's re-elected. Zambia has made an appeal to the international community for $900 million to deal with its worst drought on record. British MPs have overwhelmingly backed plans to ban anyone born after 2009 from ever buying cigarettes. The proposal also makes less appealing to young children. Kenya's police chief is being sued over comments he made about striking medics. On Sunday, Mr. Kobe ordered police to take action against the demonstrators who he said were becoming a public nuisance. The UN says a number of countries have pledged more than $600 million in additional humanitarian aid for Ethiopia. The UN says conflict, drought, and floods have left more than 20 million people there needing urgent help. In the European Champions League, Paris Saint-Germain will face Borussia Dortmund in their semi-finals after they won their respective games.
Welcome back to Business Matters. You're with Devina Gupta. We also have our two guests with us, David Kroll, financial analyst and the co-founder of the Smart Investor based in Singapore, and Sarah Burke, the economist bureau chief for Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. Thank you both for being with us. Now let's head to my country, India, because we're counting down to elections there, the biggest in the world, because we're talking about billions here. It's the world's most populous country, and elections here are unmatched in scope, size, and scale. Almost 1 billion voters are there in India, making it the biggest democratic exercise around the world, and possibly the most expensive as well, because polling stations are set up wherever people live in India, from coastal cities in south to the rural regions, then west, and we also have jungles to the east, the Himalayan mountains in the north. Everywhere in between you'll find there are polling stations, nearly 1 million of them, that are set up to ensure that most of these voters, all the voters, have a say in the elections. And there's been a large turnout as the year goes by. Opinion polls are showing that the current Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi of the BJP, remains popular, while the opposition parties have come together under a united bloc of INDIA, or India, led by the Congress party's Mr. Rahul Gandhi. So we thought of looking at the cost, the issues that are dominating in one of the world's fastest growing economies. Let me welcome Manisha Priyam to the show. She's a political analyst joining us from India. Thanks, Manisha, for being with us. Always a pleasure speaking to you. What's the mood for the elections this time in India?
This is very good morning to you from India, Devina.
Good morning.
We are about to vote for the first round of the elections, so we are really in the penultimate days leading up to the voting, and I can tell you that almost all parties are quite nervous as to what the outcomes are going to be. There is a lineup on both sides. The leading government today is led by the Bharatiya Janata Party. They've also notched up an alliance, and they call themselves the National Democratic Alliance. On the other side, you have the Congress and a host of other regional parties that rule